Welcome. I'm the executive director of the Lenny Zakem Fund, and just wanted to make sure our audio is working fine. You can see me fine. This is our webinar, our first webinar of the year, and it's on remote work tips and tricks. And our guest presenter and facilitator is Maura Ramsey, who's the executive director of Groundwork South Coast, which is she'll tell you more about it, but I'll just summarize it as environmental justice and youth development focus. But really, this is just to help folks who are still trying to figure out kind of working remotely in terms of kind of prioritizing, managing your workload, but also managing staff or volunteers and kind of more hearing from more what has worked well for her, and then also hearing your questions around what are you interested in learning more about, what are you struggling with, and how we can all be helpful to each other. And this is being recorded, and hopefully it works so that we can reference it in the future. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to Maura.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today and for having me. Thank you very much to Eric for inviting me to do this. This is very exciting for me. As Eric mentioned, I'm the executive director of Groundwork South Coast. We are a small grassroots nonprofit. We just celebrated our third birthday, actually. And this is in this role that I'm currently in, this is my third time taking on a lovely startup type of an environment. So part of what inspired me to sort of offer that I have this skill set to share with our community is that I've experienced in different ways this exact thing before, obviously not in the context of pandemic, but in the context of pivoting programming to working remotely, thinking about how to work in really different contexts and still kind of center the things that are most important for us. So previous to my experience working at Groundwork South Coast, I worked for an organization called Mothers Out Front that was also in the startup mode. And at that time, I helped the organization actually switch from being, what are we doing? We're working in different places and we have some folks working remotely and some not, to really intentionally switch to a fully remote organization, and then to think about how to intentionally and healthfully build a remote workplace culture, especially for folks who who came on board weren't originally planning on working in a remote organization. So, the context is apropos now. So what I wanted to do today was just start with, maybe I can share my screen. Let me make sure I don't need to. Okay, here we go. Great. So hopefully you guys can see this and you're not seeing any of the Zoom functionality at the same time. If someone could just give me like a thumbs up or put something in. Thanks, Eric. Great. So I just wanted to share super quickly. I wanted to mention that I prefer my pronouns are she, her, hers. I often forget that, and I think that piece is really important in terms of inclusivity. So thank you for your patience around that. This is sort of the agenda that I was thinking about today. So an introduction and background. We'll go through the basics of so just some really simple tips and tricks around using Zoom, depending on folks' comfort level. ABC and 1, 2, 3 is a little bit of a activity that I've created to make that a little bit more engaging. So we'll talk a little bit about the experience of remote work. And then some of the ideas around, remote culture cultivation. And then we'll just open it up to questions and free-form conversation. So I want to encourage everyone as we go through this, anything that sparks sort of a thought, a question, an idea, please feel free to put it in the chat. That's part of when we get to the question section, we'll be reviewing that. If something comes up that's really pertinent, or I say something that's confusing to folks and I miss it in the chat, Eric and I spoke and he'll sort of flag it for me so that we can stop and do that. Because we have a smaller group, we have a lot more flexibility to really kind of follow things where they go and be a little bit more organic than with a larger group, which I think can be really fun. So then what I wanted to do next is just quickly give everyone a chance to go around and introduce yourselves, your org affiliation role, and also if you could share your pronouns. And then we'll go, and then I'll ask you to put in the chat after you introduce yourselves, just one thing that you're hoping to get out of the workshop today. So we can do this popcorn style, or I can call on folks. So I'll see if anyone volunteers.
Hi, I can start. I'm Susan Lovett, and my organization is called Hands to Heart Center, Yoga for the People. And we're a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that shares the healing practice of yoga with people affected by addiction, poverty, and trauma. Our community yoga teachers go into community centers, branch libraries, shelters, high poverty schools, prisons, and residential treatment units to do free, customized, trauma-sensitive yoga classes as a way of increasing mental health and physical health. So we see it as a public health initiative and a way to share this really effective resource that can help alleviate symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, and trauma. And my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm talking to you from Jamaica Plain today.
Great. Who would like to go next?
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Divya from Saheli, which is a South Asian DV agency. I'm really happy to be attending this workshop, webinar. We had to go, remote 3 weeks ago, and it's hard for a DV agency where it is such people-centric and such high touch point with people to actually go remote and to figure out not only how you connect to survivors of domestic violence safely, but at the same time, you cannot be in person, meet them in person, or even have like a Zoom call, because sometimes, we have to figure out technology, what is safe, what is not. So it's taken a lot of figuring out, a lot of webinars, and, being attended by all staff members from NOVA, from NNEDP, from all the other DV, coalitions. But yet it's still up to the DV agency what works for their clients, what works for us. So we are, every day is about figuring out which clients are safe to call, which clients we do not touch at this time. And we are getting calls from clients who are still living with their abusers, but they disconnect their phone and then we don't hear from them. So there's also that secondary trauma of that, great worry about, these clients. So, we are all going through this thing, yet not really able to connect to anyone. All of us are literally isolated in our homes. We do have daily staff meetings that we have instituted. So at least we see each other's faces and we talk about issues. Of course, it's no substitute for being in the office together. So yes, I'm excited to learn more ideas about how we make ourselves more effective working remotely. And thank you to Lenny Zakam for doing this workshop. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. Who's next?
This is Lily. Can people hear me?
You said your name is Lily?
Lily, yes. Is this better? Whoops, no. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Better.
Okay. So I'm Lily. I'm the founder and I'm ED for the Resilient Sisterhood Project. We focus on Black women's reproductive health, primarily looking at a range of diseases of the reproductive system that affect women of African descent, and doing that through a social justice lens. So we look at the social determinants of health that can make women. Hello?
Go ahead, we can see you.
Okay. Yeah, so we focus on a lot of social determinants of health in terms of as they relate to reproductive health. from health inequity to food security, toxic exposure to chemicals, and as well as the physical, the well-being of women in terms of domestic and sexual violence. I should preface that the genesis of the Resilient Sisterhood Project stems from my work from working with survivors of DV, human trafficking and sexual violence for decades. And that's what led me to start my organization to focus on Black women's reproductive health. But we've been working remotely for about 3 weeks right now. And also my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carmen Esteves. My business is Esteves Creative Group. I'm not as experienced as the others in here, but that's why I'm here. I'm looking to learn. I'm actually starting as a startup in digital and graphics. And also, I would be building to an agency or a firm. And one of my challenges, well, it's quite a few challenges, is how do I convert from that startup level to the possibility of the firm agency, and just even conducting and holding a staff, and just the procedures and maybe even some protocols to put in place. So I'm sure I can learn a lot from all you guys in here. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, Carmen. Let's see, who would like to go next? So we just have a couple of folks left.
I'll jump in. This is Sonia Good and Alexis. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, I am employed with Fenway Health out of Fenway, Mass area, Boston. And I am a manager for low threshold services. And so right now, many of our clients don't have access to a lot of the technology that we need because of being homeless or just having restricted resources. And so I thought that this would be helpful in just seeing if there's any ideas that are talked about or other tips that can be given to help how to think about how to reach out, how to access people that are difficult in being accessed. And I use her, she pronouns.
So I think the only person left is maybe Dominique. Do you want to say hi as well?
Sorry, I forgot how to unmute for a second. I'm Dominique Ramos. I'm with the LZF Fund. And I would really like to get more experience with Zoom out of this. I had difficulty unmuting myself, so that should tell you all about how comfortable I am with Zoom. Oh, and I use she or he pronouns.
Great. Okay, so thank you to everyone. I just want to do one last sweep to make sure, you know, when I'm sharing the screen, I have to kind of scroll through so that I can see the page I'm sharing with you all. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone that's on the call today for introductions. Great. So that sound, the silence is a good thing. So we have a really interesting, very diverse group of folks in some ways, and then some interesting overlaps in some other ways in terms of experiences, interests, skills, and sort of what folks are hoping to get out of this today, which is really pretty exciting. I don't know that we're going to be able to, because some of the things are so specific and so different, I don't know if we'll be able to cover everything today, but we can definitely have a start point to sort of get everyone to the same place in some ways. And then depending on the topic or the details, I'm happy to have follow-up conversations with anyone who would like to talk further individually. During this time, I feel like personally, part of why I offered this and I'm doing this is because I feel like I can I can help others in our sector as a thought partner and as someone to just think through because of some of the experiences that I have. And it's one of the things that I can sort of give during this time in our history. So the next thing that I wanted to do was this activity that I talked about, which I'm calling ABC 123. And so the idea is, and I hope it works because I've never done it before. I've done the 1, 2, 3, which is a scale of 1 to 10 many times, but not the ABC. But what I wanted to do, because we have a smaller group today, so I wanted to try out actually seeing where everyone is with the software. You know, we heard in our last example from Dominique that using Zoom is a new experience for her. So she, for example, it's up to her, but she would probably be a C, possibly a B. Whereas like someone like me who worked remotely for, 2+ years before this current role, I would put myself as an A. And then you do a scale of 1 to 10. And I think it's important to say that in this context that we're in this COVID-19 remote work world we find ourselves, it's important to think about your 1 to 10 context, not in terms of the way life was 5 weeks ago, but the way that it is now, the way it's been for the last 3 or 4 weeks. So please put yourself, and I put at the bottom as an example that today I'm an A7. So I would like everyone to put your letter and your number into the chat. Give everyone a moment to do that. Great. Great. And so then while you're adding those, I would like everyone to kind of take a look at where folks are dropping their information now into the chat, and look at someone who what they put stood out to you, or someone who during the introductions you found what they had to say was something that resonated with you or something that was interesting to you. And what I would like everyone to do now, give me a moment. Of course I can't, you guys can all see my screen and I can't, I have a guideline, a guiding picture for us. So, oops. So under the chat section, there's a part that says to everyone, and there's a down arrow. You can see I have it circled here in blue, and you can click on the down arrow and you can pick one person to send a private chat to. And so I would like everyone to take a look at where folks are. So, you know, whether we have a C1 or an A10, someone who stood out to you in one way or another, and send them just a quick word of encouragement individually right now. All right. If there's anyone who is having a challenging time with figuring out how to send an individual chat, please raise your hand. Oh wait, I haven't showed you how to raise your hand yet. Sorry, I'll do that next. Please put something in the group chat that you're having a hard time with that. Okay. All right, so it looks like this is going well for everyone. So one of the really actually kind of fun and great things about working to having Zoom or virtual based meetings is the fact that you can have the audio content and then the chat content functioning simultaneously. Sometimes it can feel a little bit distracting, so you kind of have to assess for yourself, where is it that the chat conversation versus the audio content and conversation, where do I need to kind of put my focus? But it can be really great too, because instead of with the funky stuff with different audio things on a chat with trying to flip in and out, it can be a really nice place to kind of put your thoughts and have all of your thoughts captured. Another thing with some of this stuff is that with the, with the chat, you can see here with the red circle that I have on the screen. Hopefully this isn't too confusing here. That probably looks a little bit better now for folks. So this red circle here, where it says more on the chat, you can click the down arrow, and that at the end or at any point during the conversation, you can download the chat. In Zoom, the chat content, it comes up. It's not very pretty. It's not super user-friendly at the end. It's very much like every space has like a little square kind of thing. You know, it's like written very like technical computer jargon, I guess. I don't know what the right word is. But that is a great way to capture that. So when people are sharing different resources in the chat, you don't have to worry about scrambling and then trying to write it down somewhere else. You can just download it and then cut and paste it from the saved chat later on. And so a good practice too is whenever you're running a remote meeting is to save the chat at the end so that if anyone forgot to download it, you can then share it out with them later. Great. So the next thing I wanted to run through with folks, if anyone hasn't done this super quickly, while I have this up, is that you can rename yourself. Sometimes when we come in, so Lily, for example, I'm going to pick on her a little bit. I asked Eric to rename her because I don't have that level of hosting access on this call. But if you have folks who are coming in, if you're hosting and you have folks who are coming in on a phone call, for example, so it's just a phone number and you have like 3 or 4 phone numbers and they all start with like 617 or 508 or whatever, and it gets confusing very quickly, you can click on them in the participant list, or you can hover over their video and an ellipse, you know, the 3 dots will come up, and in both ways, you can then rename them. And if you guys want now, you can even play with renaming yourselves. You know, you can add your organization name if you want to play with it. But it's just it's a nice little thing to help keep track of who's in your virtual conference room. So yeah, hold on, let me pull up let's back up. Great. So the next thing I wanted to do is run through the idea of basic norms for working remotely. Just real quick, if folks could give me a little feedback in the chat, if like the information I've shared so far and my pacing is okay for everyone, or if anyone's feeling like I'm moving too fast or skipping stuff, just so I can get a sense, because, you know, we're remote, so we can't all rely on the same level of feedback that we get from those nonverbal cues in a room together, right? Okay, Susan would like to make a comment about the chat. Go ahead, Susan.
Thanks. So I use Zoom to teach a little bit with the Boston University School of Social Work, and sometimes the students chat with each other, and they're not always aware that the host can then see the chat. So they might be chatting like, this is really boring, or, you know, or just talking about something completely off topic. So as more and more meetings and classes and trainings are taking place online, people are finding out these things, and sometimes somewhat embarrassing ways. So just wanted to put that out there as a cautionary tale.
Great, thank you, Susan. And we can talk a little bit more about some of those pieces. You know, I remember how more and more every time someone asks me a question or mentions something in each one of these conversations since we started to do remote work as a nation. But I think that's a very good point. You know, one of the things that's going to be in these are my basic norms of kind of how to work remotely. So not the norm setting that we do in terms of actual, like the interpersonal dynamics of being in a meeting, but how to work in a remote space, right? Because it's different. And so, you know, I think that I don't have that specifically in here, but that's a good one. You know, one of the other things, one of the other norms I have in here that is really important is to think about you on every single Zoom meeting you'll ever have. You have people who are on the computer, and you almost always also have people who aren't. They're on the phone or toggling to the different things, and capturing everything is hard. So it's really important that any kind of detailed resources like phone numbers, websites, emails, links, things like that, that you share out loud, you share in the chat, and vice versa. So that's to piggyback off that, Susan said. And then I just have some quick other, just like I call them norms on this. We could call them best practices, however you want to think about it. Anytime you join a call, anytime you're not talking, especially if you're in a large group, you really want to mute. I think folks don't realize like that even now I wasn't muting all the time because I'm facilitating, and I was nervous about it because I was taking notes as you all were sharing in your introductions, and I was like, how much is the microphone on my computer picking that up and actually interrupting the audio and distracting people? So it's a small but super important thing. The great thing about that is if you are facilitating a Zoom call, I have another, hold on, don't need, oops. Sorry, I'm having a hard time working around the Zoom picture. Is that when you're setting up a Zoom meeting, if you're using Zoom, and because it seems like everybody and all their cousins are suddenly using Zoom in this new atmosphere, I just pulled like Zoom specific tips and tricks at this time. But you have similar functionality on all of the web, the video conferencing software that's available. So what I wanted to point out is this is sort of it's just color coded like for fun. There's not specific meaning behind the colors. But so under meeting options, you can see down, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but so I always enable to join before the host so that folks can just be in the meeting. There's a waiting room function like that Eric used at the beginning of this call that I encountered, where a thing just comes up that says the meeting will start shortly. With folks that are new or newer to Zoom or just less comfortable in this kind of remote work environment, that can be daunting. They'll think they've done something wrong. They might leave and not come back. They might think it's not working. And so I usually just enable that anyone can join. I make it under meeting password that no password is required. I make sure that no one has to register for all those same reasons because of folks that are new to this kind of technology, their comfort. And then what I do is I also set it up so that everyone's automatically muted upon entry. For a meeting this size where you just have a few folks as the facilitator, it's really easy to just go through and mute and unmute folks manually. But when you have one of those calls where you think 10 people will show up and you have 60, it can be very daunting to then scroll through and try to figure out, well, who's not muted and who's talking now and who needs a mute. And then you have the extra layer of the folks on the phone. If you start going through and manually muting their phone, they can't unmute themselves and they can't necessarily participate in the chat to let you know when they want to speak. So this can just be a really simple, easy way to support the best quality sound while also, having people be able to mute and unmute themselves later. The other thing, just because it's the last piece I haven't talked about on here, is I really think about whether or not to record the meeting automatically. Sometimes there are meetings that you absolutely want to make sure that they're recorded, like something like this where it's a training, because you want to be able to share that information again later or review it to learn from it. Or maybe, if you've decided as an organization, we're going to save all of our meetings because we know that it's harder to process information in a remote environment. But the trick is, if you decide to record in advance so that you don't forget, the trick is to just make sure, which Eric modeled beautifully at the beginning, is letting everyone know that it's recorded, and just to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that. I think especially as folks who aren't accustomed to or comfortable with this remote atmosphere, just making sure that they know that that's happening, I think is really, really important for their comfort. Okay, so another thing I like to share is if you're moving around while you're if you're picking up your computer, you're working from your phone and you're walking around, it's really good to turn off your video. sometimes it's fine, the movement is small, and sometimes it moves so much that it can kind of like kick in motion sickness for some folks. So it's a silly little thing, but sometimes in a meeting, I'll turn my video on and off like 3 or 4 times, right? Like if my dog comes bounding into my face and I don't want to majorly distract folks during the call, I'll turn the video off or something like that. And then I talked about how to change your name already. Another thing is, one of the things I learned in working with mothers and grandmothers throughout Massachusetts. So I was working with about 1,000 volunteers using doing remote-based community organizing. That those of us who didn't grow up with technology, we're afraid of doing something wrong, right? We're afraid of breaking it, or we're afraid of messing it up. The great thing about a lot of the tools that we have today is that the hosts have a lot more access to functionality than anyone else. So pretty much the only thing that you can do, if you click on buttons and you play with it and you move stuff around, the worst thing you can do is kick yourself out of the room. And then all you have to do is go back to the original link that was sent to you in an email or in a calendar invite, click on it again, and rejoin the meeting. At most, you miss a couple of minutes of a meeting, but in most cases, you won't do that to yourself, and you'll get a lot more comfortable with the platform a lot more quickly. Because that's what I did, and what others that I've known that have gotten very comfortable with it have done that aren't like tech experts. Right? My background is in social work. It is not in it is not in Zoom. So then, a big thing, and I said this already, but, I want to just sort of reemphasize it, that working remotely is hard, right? It's hard for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons is is concentration. It's really hard to concentrate for hours on end and days on end in video call after video call after video call. And so I think just giving yourself the space and giving others that sort of space, that permission, whatever you need to acknowledge that the amount of information that you're going to process, independent of all of the other stress triggers, trauma that we're experiencing as a result of COVID-19, like just working remotely in, quote unquote, typical environment is harder. In terms of that concentration. So to be gentle with yourself, and to think about ways for yourself that you can get the information that you need. So whether that's reviewing the recordings later, looking at the chat, setting up an expectation that someone will be capturing notes during, especially like staff meetings or things like that. And then the other thing is, I've seen a lot in the last 3 to 4 weeks of all of a sudden, it went from everyone kind of going, oh, what do we do now, to everyone having meetings on Zoom all the time. And meetings that could be emails, right? Meetings where people really just feel a need for connection. And so they want to just have a meeting and have a topic about something. And so I think it's really important to to think about what were the norms that you had for meeting setting and how you facilitated meetings and how meetings functioned before. And, perhaps your organizational culture norms as well. And then really have an intentional conversation with your team or with your clients, whoever it is that you're having conversations with, about how are you holding those norms, or how are those norms different in this space. So for me, I talk a lot about making the implicit explicit just in general. And I think when we're in this space and time where we are not in the same physical place as each other, we miss so much, and so much more can be implicit, and so many more tensions and miscommunications and confusions can arise if we don't work on making things explicit. Yeah, so any questions, comments, thoughts? about what I just shared? Because I just talked a lot.
Hi, I think it's great to go over the norms in the, when you first start meeting. And for me, there's one set of norms with staff, and then there's another with clients. And so it's two different types of remote work. And working with clients, I know many of you are doing, and reaching out in ways, especially folks that are working with DV survivors, is there's a lot of the privacy issues and for us as well. So in my agency, we're kind of gathering best practices around doing this kind of telehealth and counseling, and some of the concerns are really around confidentiality and HIPAA and what the Zoom platform protects and doesn't protect. So I think it's just worthwhile to kind of pay some attention to that. And HIPAA regulations are kind of being lowered right now during this pandemic, but I work with youth affected by trauma and poverty, and there's so many limits on doing that remotely, because kids are in their homes with their family members, and they may not say much, may not feel safe to say much. It's noisy, there may be limited access to devices or internet, so all those complications that come along with the non-staff stuff are the things that we're kind of grappling with over here.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for sharing, Susan. Anyone else?
I can just comment in response to what Susan said. Some of the suggestions that Maura gave earlier are somewhat counter to the kind of the privacy concerns. So, for one, you can think of it as making it easy to use for a small kind of group of people. But then if you think about, there's a way where you can limit Zoom so that you restrict it where people have to sign in with an account, or you can, generate the Zoom link with a password. So you can also build in some of the, you can enable some of the settings so that there is a higher level of security. You may have noticed, you may have seen screenshots on social media, or if you use Facebook, of people taking pictures of their Zoom screens. But, if you think of it, like, teachers shouldn't be doing that, because then, if the students have their names listed, then there's a picture of a student in their name. So even if you think of the normal classroom environment, the rule of thumb is usually to get a waiver or take the pictures of the backs of students' heads. So, just thinking of that in terms of how you're sharing any content, but also, just being mindful of kind of some of the settings you put in place up front, that whether they're needed or not in terms of privacy, because there certainly are some things you can do to kind of enhance it. Because there's even, I don't know if you're going to touch on it, Zoom bombing, which has become a phrase lately, but basically it's, people just accessing Zoom meetings because those links were just posted. They were just posted, and then everyone had access. So then if you click on it, you just have access to it. Whereas, putting on a password or enabling it in certain ways so that there's a waiting room, kind of restricts access to certain specific people.
Right. So I, with the norms, this was sort of like the norms for how we actually interact on the call today. And then I just build out a little bit extra for that. And it wasn't, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking more about just how do we start using Zoom and how do we work on our culture. And I want to just quickly, I caught that I forgot a norm, which is asking everyone every time when you start to speak to just say your name again, in case folks can't see the video so that they know who's speaking. But to finish addressing some of this, I want to go on to the next section, which is, and thinking about this, I've been thinking about the 4 buckets of remote work, right? So the first one, which we're talking about, is this idea of a virtual conference room, right? And I think, Susan, what you're talking about in a lot of ways is like, when is the big conference room where anybody can just walk in and out of the room at any time? Not okay, right? And I think we have several folks on the call who are working with people with whom confidentiality and, you know, being very careful about contact and what's being conveyed and how it's being conveyed is a major consideration. And I think that that also tethers in with like some of my other tips and tricks. I think right now around like how we use the virtual conference room and not, and also how we think about some of these other buckets, so the individual and the interpersonal in particular. And one of the things that I really sort of caution or urge folks is that just because we're working remotely does not mean that every meeting needs to be a video. And it does not mean that every kind of information touch point needs to be a video, right? In this time more than ever, you have to think about, in a day-to-day when you're face-to-face with folks, we have so many different ways that we communicate information, right? You cross someone in the hallway, you know, you cross paths with them and you exchange a smile, or you see that someone's shoulders are slumped and you ask them how they're doing, or you have a chuckle over lunch or when you're getting coffee, or, you know, so there's so many of those interactions just in the internal place, much less all the different ways that we have touch points with our external stakeholders or our clients, or whichever way you refer to folks. And it's really important to think about how do we cultivate that, right? So this workshop for today and the time we had isn't about giving everyone all the answers, right? And it would be incredibly presumptuous of me. I'm not a clinician. I haven't done that level of work in a, you know, even like that level of confidentiality that Susan was talking about, I haven't done in a very long time. So it would be presumptuous of me to think that I know better than Susan, who sounds like she's rapidly becoming an expert on this call, right? But what I do know is that you need to switch it up. So you need to talk to people on the phone. With young people and with folks who feel unsafe, if you can come up with a secure and safe way to text them, texting can be an amazing tool, right? There's still email, right? And we have all of these other different resources depending on what kind of, you know, depending on what kind of access and comfort level that you have that you can use. Spending some time asking folks what they need, whether it's internally or it's with your clients, in terms of how to get those touch points in those different ways, is really important. You know, so I kind of like, I think it was Divya who said they switched to having a daily staff meeting. So I've switched to that as well with my staff person. Instead of doing 2 hours a week, we do a half an hour a day, knowing that we're only gonna actually have the call or the video chat probably 3 or 4 days a week, and we leave it flexible. So each day we check in. Does it make sense to check in today or not? And then what we've said is one day a week we do a video call, and the rest we just hop on the phone. And then sometimes we just exchange Google chats because we're on a Google platform. And so we're being very careful about balancing it out. And so then anytime I'm not in front of the video chat, when I hop on the phone, I walk, because one of the things that we lose in this too, in terms of that individual experience, like how it's impacting us, we're not moving as much, right? We're sitting. You can go from meeting to meeting to meeting and never get out of your chair, right? And so thinking about how do you build in those ways that you would get up and walk to a meeting in this time is a really important thing to consider as well. I'm going to take a deep breath because I just jumped around in all the buckets, which was not my plan. But the conversation went in such a interesting direction. So
I just wanted to say something. This is Divya again. So one of the things we find is that we have a WhatsApp group for our team, And so if for during the day, there are so many things that come up, and it's hard to call and wait, if the person is on another. So we WhatsApp each other like constantly, things that have come up, things that we need to do, if there's a webinar coming up, if someone needs to go, or if I can't go, so it's like a constant communication during the day. We've tried to enforce that, you work during the work hours, although we get client calls at all times, but at least not do the office work outside of work hours. So the WhatsApp really works and keeps us connected. I just want to share that. And we do phone calls too. And the daily staff meetings are really, sometimes we just discuss how we are feeling. There's not, but that really helps. So I think it's a good way to connect. I just also want to share, we have a team member who is sick and we don't know whether it's COVID-19. So we are all really worried about her. So just the connection on WhatsApp and helps us through this. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Divya. I think that is, she brought up something I think is really important, and we're starting to run kind of low on time. So I won't be able to go into all the level of detail that we had sort of planned on or hoped with some of these buckets. But I think for me, I think the biggest takeaway when we think about the individual, the interpersonal, the conference room work, and really all of our buckets it's about how are we continuing to build connections, care for ourselves, and care for each other in this time. And I think we don't necessarily always realize it, but in our office environments, in our work environments, we care for our colleagues, right? We have some of those informal interactions I talked about earlier. We think of them as almost, I think, as a culture, oftentimes in America, I think we think of them as incidental, right? But really that is like the glue that holds us together and helps us do the work that we really do. And so when we're working remotely, if we don't have that glue, then things start to separate and start to fall apart and start to not be as cohesive as we're trying to move forward in this hard time. And so making that space, you can see in the interpersonal bucket here, making that space to really intentionally cultivate the informal is vital. So whether you just make space to informally chat with folks at the beginning of every meeting and make that really clear, like we are not working in an agenda, but we see this as an important piece of our work. Or whether you start to host social hours on Zoom for your team, or if you have like a drop-in kind of environment where you invite other folks to come and join you, like there's different things that you can do like that. One of the things that I talk about is I call them virtual smiles, that because we don't have those exchanges, those smiles and glances and things like that. I think Divya the example she gave of how they use WhatsApp in her place of work is a perfect example. They're replacing some of that lost nonverbal communication with using the WhatsApp. I like through GChat, I like to send people those goofy little stickers and encourage them to send it back as how they're feeling, because the visual that's not words is a way to connect without it being as big of like a distraction at the same time, and it conveys a feeling in a different way. So I'm sure there's lots of fun and different ways that you can do that, and you can think about that. It looks like my computer is going to die soon, so I might have to go around and grab my charger. I'm sorry. The last piece around this, which I've kind of hit on already, but the idea of really like cultivating the explicit more than ever, right? For any of us, and I think as all current or former grantees of Lenny Zakem Fund, we're all thinking about race and other forms of equity as a really important piece of our work, and that's the lens through which we are all working, and being really explicit and about what we're doing and how we're doing it is a really important piece to keep working on equity, and even more so I think in this time and place, because of the way that it's so easy for so much more to become implicit. So with the time that we have left, because we only have 9 minutes, I can talk a little bit more about some of the programmatic shifts that my work has done, or that we've done at my organization, or we can open it up to different questions and comments and see, and then I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone who wants to know. I'm happy to share the website where we talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done. And I could go quickly, you know, in this bucket here, I put sort of some of the details of the pieces that I've gone through or am going through as we're doing our remote work. But that's more about the larger framework. And again, not like some of the details around, I didn't prep to think. We've done a lot of stuff around how do we safely and securely get consent and get, you know, different of the stuff that it's not HIPAA level confidentiality, but how do we safely and confidentially work with the folks that we're working with in the way that we are. So I didn't prepare materials around that today, but I'm happy to have, for these last few minutes, have the conversation guided in whichever way you all would like. So I think maybe I'd like to open it up to questions, if that sounds good to you, Eric, and see where we get. Does that work? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as soon as I can remember how to do that. Hold on. It is not. Sorry, oh, there we go. Okay.
Hi, this is Lily. I have a question. How do I do a lot of cross-building movement. I collaborate a lot with community partners, and I find myself on almost every day sitting in front of my laptop, sometimes from 9:30 a.m. up to like maybe 8, 9 o'clock, even though I'm working remotely from home. I find myself just like quickly grabbing lunch and barely have time to eat it to just run to another Zoom meeting. And when I try to suggest to some folks, you know, could we have like a full conference call, just so I don't find myself sitting in front of the laptop. I just find people are like a little bit hesitant and they still prefer to do Zoom. And I don't know whether they are in the same situation as me, sitting in front of a laptop for hours and hours. What is the best way, you know, for me to respectfully and suggest that we do conduct some of those meetings, you know, via phone call, where I can at least stand and walk. And I should also preface, I fell a week ago and badly injured myself. I don't know if we can see, I have a cut under my nose. It's healing, but I injured my left knee, and there's no good position to really keep one's knee because it's not in a cast, and I was afraid to go to the hospital. So it's been really, really hard. So what's the best way to kind of like suggest to people that maybe we can take a break from Zoom and just use a free conference call platform? You know, so for example, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm sorry to hear about your fall. Carrying that physical pain, new physical pain in particular, on top of all of this is hard. So
it's been challenging.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things that I really try to encourage folks to think about is, and it's hard it sounds like you feel like you don't have permission to say no. And I don't know what the root of that is, but I would say that I try very hard not to schedule back-to-back Zoom meetings. So I give myself, I try to actually give myself 15 minutes between meetings. And I don't give anyone sort of the option to schedule with me in a way that is back-to-back. Does it happen sometimes still because people are throwing meetings left, right, and center and not asking when we want to meet? Yes. But I've been giving myself permission to turn my video off and get up and walk around then when I don't have breaks between meetings. And even I'll do like, I try between every meeting, I try to personally make myself do at least one yoga pose or one kind of stretch. And Lily, with your circumstances, you know, it sounds like it sounds like just saying, I need this, I need to do a phone call, I need to be able to process in a different way, right? And seeing how that goes. But then also giving yourself permission to turn your video off. And even if you're doing chair-based stretches or you're fixing your lunch or whatever, you can still listen. But with your physical pain, with working for so many hours, and with not taking breaks to eat, I hope you're not taking care of yourself in the way that you need. And this isn't something that's going to end, you know, in the next couple of weeks. We're in for the long haul. And so that level of self-care is more important than ever before, as we're all having to kind of relearn it in this context. And so, you know, maybe you have a conversation even in the chat about asking, how are people caring for themselves and what do they need? And how can we all, as a team, think about how to take care of each other better? Might be a way to approach it. I don't know.
It's not that I don't feel like I don't have the permission to say no. I have a sense that perhaps people want to bond and they want to see each other's faces, and everyone means well. So kind of like drawing on that, I refrain from saying, no, let's do that. And plus, I'm not even sharing with everyone, oh, I enjoyed myself. It's just like too overwhelming to just keep saying, well, here's why we shouldn't. I cannot do that. But anyway, I just kind of like wanted to know what's the best way to just not to spend hours and hours and just all doing Zoom, while there are other platforms that we have used before. And then I feel that there seems to be some reluctance from people about using, other platforms to communicate.
And I guess I just respond to that as well, just saying, the way in which you use your calendar, just, block out time to eat as though it were a meeting or appointment, so that you can be intentional about making sure you're taking time out of your day to take a break from your laptop and just literally step away and say, nope, I'm going to eat for 10 minutes and read for 45 minutes. And I'm not going to check anything, any emails or anything until that hour is up. And then, at least that way you're, and being intentional with your a planned and scheduled break. And, for whatever time works for you, but at least you're not, just sitting all day and just forgetting to grab something to eat.
Yeah. And I think, it is, we have to balance, right? Like, so there's this, what I hear from you, Lily, is this amazing concern, I think, about taking care of everyone, but you have to be cared for equally in that, so that you can care for all those folks who are thirsty for connection over the long haul. Because we're not going to start desiring connection less a month from now, right? We're going to desire it even more. I hope some of the stuff that myself and Eric said is helpful. And
definitely. Thank you so much.